The courtroom gasps as a black woman testifies, not knowing she's there on a mission for the CIA. They always say the truth will set you free, but what if the truth was never meant to be told? Elena Moreau thought she was just another witness in a high-profile trial, but as she stepped into the courtroom, every eye was on her. Not out of curiosity, but out of fear. She held the key to exposing one of the most powerful men in the country. Yet, what no one saw coming was that the real secret wasn't about him. It was about her. The moment the defense attorney asked one question, the entire room fell silent. And that's when Elena realized she wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for her own survival. Elena Moreau's hands trembled as she pushed open the heavy wooden door that led into Courtroom 26B of the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Her almond brown eyes flicked nervously to the people seated in the gallery. Onlookers, reporters, curious citizens, and a smattering of activists filled the benches to capacity. A quiet tension suffused the air. Outside, the mid-afternoon sun cut shadows against the tall windows, and inside, the hush was broken only by the soft rustle of fabric and shuffling of shoes on polished floors. Elena's heart pounded. She was a petite, elegant black woman, 33 years old, with neatly braided hair pinned back in a conservative style befitting a day in federal court. She wore a crisp white blouse and a charcoal skirt that grazed her knees. Subtle gold earrings caught the light, but otherwise, her attire was muted. She had been waiting to testify for hours, pacing back and forth in the hallway, trying to quell the swirling torrent of thoughts in her mind. She took a moment to take in the layout, the gleaming wooden panels, the high bench where the judge presided, the rows of attorney tables. At the far right, just beyond the bar that separated the legal area from the public seats, stood the witness box she would soon occupy. Her stomach tightened. For reasons she herself couldn't fully articulate, she felt as though she were living in a dream, or perhaps more aptly, a nightmare. Judge Maria V. Delgado, known for her meticulous approach to federal cases, sat at the bench, her dark robes framing her stern expression. To her right, the American flag and the official seal of the United States District Court seemed to bear silent witness to everything that transpired. Elena remembered overhearing something about the judge's storied career. Judge Delgado was the first Hispanic-American woman to serve as an Article III judge in U.S. history, a detail that resonated with Elena's own sense of pride at seeing women of color in positions of power. Yet, at this moment, Elena's mind was consumed with fear, not pride. The moment Elena's gaze fell upon the defense team, her pulse skyrocketed. Victor Sinclair, the powerful CEO who was now on trial for corruption, espionage, and money laundering, sat stiffly behind the defense table. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and the lines on his forehead spoke of a life spent frowning at subordinates. Next to him, his high-priced attorney, David Kessler, whispered something into Sinclair's ear. The two men cast sidelong glances in Elena's direction. Across the aisle, the prosecutors wore cautious expressions, as if uncertain how Elena's testimony would affect the precarious case they had built over months of investigation. Chief among them was Assistant U.S. Attorney Brenda Collins, a formidable woman with short-cropped auburn hair. Rumor had it that she had staked her entire career on bringing Sinclair to justice. Elena stepped forward, each footfall echoing. A court officer motioned her to the witness stand. She climbed the short riser, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room upon her. 1,000 questions fluttered in her head. Why do I feel like I've prepared for this my whole life? Why does every muscle feel so tense, as though I'm braced for an explosion? She placed her left hand on the Bible offered to her and raised her right. The clerk's voice rang out, calm and official. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes, Elena managed, her throat dry. I do. The moment the clerk withdrew, Elena glanced at the judge, who offered only a polite nod. Then her eyes flicked to Sinclair. At that instant, a strange pang struck her somewhere deep in her gut. Familiarity? Betrayal? Fear? What am I doing here, she thought. Why does a part of me feel like I know more than I'm letting on, even to myself? The attorney for the prosecution, Brenda Collins, rose, her expression carefully controlled. Good afternoon, Miss Moreau. Could you please state your full name for the record? Elena cleared her throat. My name is Elena Elizabeth Moreau. A hush settled over the courtroom. The story of how Elena had come to testify was already making small waves in the press. A few reporters typed busily on their laptops, as though Elena's presence alone was worth capturing in real time. Unknown to her, the real storm was only just beginning, a storm that would shake this courtroom and everyone in it to the core. To truly understand how Elena came to be on that stand, one must rewind the clock many years to a very different setting. Elena grew up in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia. A gifted student, she'd garnered scholarships to attend the best schools. She studied international relations at Spelman College, where her professors praised her keen analytical mind and her aptitude for languages, Spanish and French in particular. Upon graduation, Elena was courted by a variety of government agencies and nonprofits. She had a fascination with world affairs, a desire to serve the greater good in the uncertain times following her senior year. Amid heated national and global politics, Elena considered positions with the State Department, USAID, and private NGOs. But the strangest offer of all came in a letter bearing the Central Intelligence Agency's crest. She remembered reading the words, "We have reviewed your credentials and believe you may be uniquely qualified to contribute to the national security of the United States. We invite you to interview at our facility in Langley, Virginia." The official tone thrilled her. The CIA wants me? The notion was both terrifying and exhilarating. In those days, Elena was young, idealistic, and believed that joining the CIA might be an opportunity to do real good in a complex world. Her mother had worried, "Baby, that's dangerous work. What if something happens to you?" Elena had shaken off her mother's concerns. "Ma, I'm just interviewing. It's a chance of a lifetime. I'd at least like to hear what they say." One interview became 2, then 3. Before she knew it, Elena found herself in a rigorous training program at Camp Perry, often referred to simply as the farm, the CIA's secretive training ground in rural Virginia. She had never felt more challenged or alive. The instructors drilled her in intelligence analysis, covert communication, cultural immersion, and a litany of advanced fieldcraft techniques. Though Elena was told from the start that her path might lead her to an analyst position, one particular instructor, Paul Vance, noticed her uncanny ability to think on her feet in high-stress situations. One afternoon, after Elena had excelled in a role-playing scenario where trainees had to talk their way out of a simulated threat environment, Vance pulled her aside. "Morrow," he said, "I think you've got a knack for more than office analysis." His gaze was piercing, and Elena shifted uncomfortably. I don't know what you mean, sir." "I think you could handle non-official cover," he clarified, referencing a type of CIA operative who doesn't operate under diplomatic immunity or recognized government positions. "You speak multiple languages, adapt quickly in social situations, and have a cool head under pressure. Not a lot of people can do that." Elena's chest tightened in excitement and dread. Was she truly capable of that level of spy work? She'd only come to the CIA with illusions of noble service. The risk was considerable, but there was also the voice in her head, that adventurous streak she had nurtured. She told herself, "If I have a chance to help in ways that matter, why not take it?" By the end of her training, Elena was more than just an analyst. She was prepared, at least academically, to handle infiltration, field reporting, even espionage if it came to that. Yet, the CIA being the labyrinthine organization it is, Elena's official postings never quite matched the glamorous spy films. She spent time in administrative roles at various U.S. embassies in Europe and Africa, analyzing intelligence, cultivating local informants, but never crossing into the realm of high-stakes infiltration. That is, until a fateful request came across her desk. The request that changed Elena's life came from a covert liaison group within the CIA, focusing on domestic economic threats, organized crime, money laundering, and corporate espionage that undermined national security. It was an unusual assignment because the CIA typically focuses outward, not inward, but the lines can blur when international and domestic interests collide. The name Victor Sinclair had surfaced repeatedly in intelligence reports, often in connection with offshore accounts, suspicious deals with foreign energy magnates, and heavy lobbying in Washington. Despite the interest from multiple agencies, CIA, FBI, IRS, there was no smoking gun that pinned Sinclair down. He was Teflon, and his philanthropic pursuits, especially in predominantly black neighborhoods, gave him an unsettling aura of being a benevolent millionaire to some, a cunning manipulator to others. Elena was briefed. Sinclair had begun hosting lavish fundraisers and philanthropic initiatives targeting African American entrepreneurs. Officially, it was lauded as closing the racial wealth gap. Unofficially, there were murmurs he was leveraging these philanthropic events to launder illicit funds through shell charities and funnel them into foreign ventures. The agencies needed someone who could move in these circles, someone who would not attract undue suspicion. At first, Elena was hesitant. Spying on a philanthropic outreach to Black communities? She felt conflicted. As a Black woman who had grown up in a tight-knit community, it rankled her to imagine that these philanthropic efforts might be tainted by corruption. But if the allegations were true, Sinclair was exploiting the very communities Elena cared deeply about. She decided she had to know the truth. And so, Elena's infiltration began quietly. She was introduced at one of Sinclair's Innovate for the Future networking galas under the guise of being an up-and-coming investment consultant with a passion for minority-owned businesses. The gala was held in a glitzy hotel in Washington, D.C., with crystal chandeliers and black tie attendees swirling in chatter and champagne. Elena, wearing an elegant midnight blue evening gown, stood out, but in the right way. She was the charismatic newcomer, bright and confident, who had a talent for making well-placed compliments and inquiries. Sinclair took note. Over weeks of continued events and dinners, Elena managed to join Sinclair's philanthropic foundation as a junior advisor. This put her in proximity to the foundation's finances, board members, and Sinclair's inner circle. She played the dutiful protege, studious, enthusiastic, always eager to help. Her position granted her unprecedented access to the labyrinth of accounts, partnerships, and hush-hush deals. Elena discreetly shared the data with her CIA handler, ensuring their investigative leads had real-time insight. Yet, as Elena became more ingrained in Sinclair's orbit, she discovered complexities that fueled her sleepless nights. Sinclair was undeniably charming and had an uncanny ability to read people's motivations. He pivoted easily between philanthropic sincerity and ruthless business cunning. She recalled an evening in Sinclair's penthouse suite. He waxed poetic about empowering underserved communities, praising Elena's vision for wealth-building programs. And then, in almost the same breath, he made pointed jokes about expanding opportunities in West Africa, remarks that seemed innocuous but rang in Elena's mind as coded references to exploitive resource deals. Every meeting, every handshake, every spreadsheet Elena scrutinized chipped away at her illusions. Something deep and rotten lay beneath Sinclair's philanthropic exterior. He laundered money through charitable accounts, rerouting funds to shell companies registered in Belize, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg. That money then re-emerged to finance questionable projects, foreign oil, private security contractors, and rumored hush money to foreign officials. Elena knew she was walking a dangerous line. One misstep, and Sinclair's suspicion might be triggered. But even more chilling was how intimately Elena began to learn about Sinclair's private life. He was a man who collected secrets, manipulated vulnerabilities, and never forgot a slight. She'd seen him quietly ruin the career of a rival CEO by leaking evidence of a past affair. She had watched him, with an easy smile, vow vengeance against a politician who opposed him. What would Sinclair do if he discovered Elena was a CIA asset? One aspect of Elena's assignment remained shrouded in deeper secrecy. She was never fully briefed on how her infiltration fit into the big picture. She delivered intelligence to her handler, but the feedback from Langley and the interagency task force was cryptic at best. Good work, they'd say. Keep collecting data. There's a bigger picture forming. Elena assumed that bigger picture was simply a thorough corruption case that the FBI would eventually bring to the DOJ. She had no idea how truly far-reaching the operation was. Sometimes, though, Elena felt a flicker of doubt. The evidence she gathered seemed so damning, and the government had it all. Why hadn't they pounced on Sinclair yet? She suspected that political pressures might be interfering, that Sinclair's connections to major donors and influential politicians created a lethal cocktail of caution and compromised intentions. Still, Elena soldiered on. She believed that if she stuck to her role, eventually the truth would surface and justice would be served. Or so she hoped. What Elena never knew, what they never told her, was that her infiltration was part of a far more convoluted operation. In separate compartments of the intelligence apparatus, Rumors circulated about Sinclair's entanglements with foreign intelligence services. Some believed he was selling sensitive data gleaned from his corporate ties and philanthropic liaisons. Others believed he might be a double agent, stepping into the murky realm where big money meets national secrets. There were even hints that certain factions within the CIA wanted Sinclair's downfall for their own reasons. Elena became a pawn in a chess match far above her clearance level. Months turned into years, and Elena's infiltration deepened. She felt her sense of self fracturing. During the day, she was the savvy advisor, rubbing shoulders with millionaires and forging partnerships. By night, she was racked with guilt and the ever-present fear of discovery. The mission was wearing on her psyche, but her sense of moral duty, both to her community and her country, drove her forward. One crisp autumn evening, Elena left Sinclair's posh offices in Midtown Manhattan and hailed a taxi to a small jazz club in Harlem, where she often met her CIA handler under the guise of unwinding. The club was low-lit, smoky, with a saxophonist wailing a soft, mournful tune. Her handler, a nondescript man in a rumpled gray suit who went by the alias Greg, was seated in a corner booth. Elena slid in opposite him, heart still hammering from a conversation she'd just had with Sinclair regarding a hush-hush investment in Eastern Europe. "Greg," she whispered anxiously, "I've got bank statements, offshore transfers. The works. He's laundering millions, and it looks like some of it might be going to extremist groups abroad." Greg's face flickered with concern. "This is bigger than we thought." He typed notes into an encrypted phone. "We need everything you can gather." "You're doing great, Elena." This could blow the lid off his whole operation. She clenched her jaw. "I'm worried. He's too calm. He's been building alliances with shady foreign players. One slip and he'll suspect me. I can feel him watching me sometimes, almost as if he's testing me." Greg reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a small plastic envelope containing a flash drive. "Here," he said. "Use this the next time you have access to his personal computer. We need more detailed logs of his communications." Elena stared at the flash drive for a long moment before taking it. She felt the heaviness of moral conflict pressing down. Greg must have sensed her hesitation because he rested a hand on her shoulder. "Elena, I know this is rough, but trust me. The people up top have your back." He lied, or at least omitted the truth. Elena realized far too late that the people up top had agendas of their own. The night that everything changed was a night Elena would play over and over again in her mind. It was at a black-tie fundraiser in New York City, just off Central Park West. Sinclair had gathered some of the wealthiest donors and foreign dignitaries. Elena was there on the pretense of hosting some philanthropic delegation from Nigeria. She'd stolen away to Sinclair's private study, a richly furnished room with dark wooden shelves filled with leather-bound books. Gold-framed portraits of Sinclair's ancestors, or perhaps random antique reproductions Elena had never been sure, lined the walls, giving the space a sense of old money grandeur. But Elena wasn't there to admire the decor. She was there to copy Sinclair's latest confidential files onto that flash drive from Greg. Her heart thudded as she slipped the flash drive into Sinclair's computer. The minutes dragged as she watched the progress bar creep across the screen. She could hear muffled laughter and piano music drifting from the main gala rooms, but the study was quiet enough for her to pick up the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. She willed it to go faster, faster. At last, it finished. She removed the flash drive and tucked it into the hidden pocket of her evening gown. As she turned to leave, she heard footsteps in the hallway, a male voice, too close. She swore under her breath and quickly stepped behind a heavy floor-to-ceiling curtain. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The handle turned. Sinclair himself entered, accompanied by one of his foreign guests, a tall man with a thick accent Elena hadn't yet identified. She dared not even breathe. Through a tiny slit in the curtain, Elena peeked out. Sinclair walked to his desk, pulling open drawers, rummaging for something while the foreign man spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Their conversation was in Russian. Elena only understood bits and pieces from her training. References to accounts, deadlines, pipeline. Their tone was tense. Pipeline. Are they discussing an energy pipeline or some covert smuggling route? Then Sinclair responded in English. "I understand. We have leverage in Washington. The arrangement will proceed according to schedule. We'll settle any complications with the government if it dares raise a red flag." The man's expression was sour. "Red flags don't concern me. I'm more worried about the infiltration in your operation. Rumors say someone in your foundation is feeding intelligence to the authorities. Elena's blood ran cold. Sinclair's eyes narrowed. That's nonsense. I keep a close eye on everyone. If there's a traitor, I'll deal with it personally. At that moment, Elena's phone vibrated in her clutch. Her heart nearly stopped. The men must have heard a faint buzz because Sinclair straightened abruptly. Elena willed herself to remain perfectly still. Sweat beaded on her forehead. After a tense moment, Sinclair shook his head as if dismissing it. Let's go, he said. We don't want to appear absent too long from the main event. As soon as they left, Elena waited a painfully long minute, her breathing shallow, before slipping out of the study. She rejoined the fundraiser, her cheeks flushed, her composure brittle. Part of her wanted to run, but she forced herself to stay, to mingle, to act as though nothing was amiss. If Sinclair had any suspicion about her, she needed to diffuse it with normalcy. But the seeds of paranoia had been planted. Sinclair would begin investigating. Elena's cover was on borrowed time. The morning after that gala, Elena was due to hand over the flash drive to Greg. They had set a rendezvous in a public park near the East River. Elena arrived with a coffee in hand, trying to appear like a casual jogger resting on a bench. But Greg never showed. Instead, a different agent approached, a man Elena had never met. He wore a well-fitted dark suit and had an earpiece reminiscent of the Secret Service. Miss Moreau, he asked quietly. Yes, Elena said, her nerves coiled tight. The man looked grim. I regret to inform you that Greg is no longer with the agency. What do you mean? Elena asked, her mind racing. We had a meet. He's my handler. The man's voice was low. Greg was reassigned, effective immediately. All operations concerning Sinclair are to be transferred. I'm your new contact. Elena tried to quell her alarm. She glanced around the park, scanning for watchers. What's your name? He didn't offer one. Let's just say I'm your official line to Langley. A beat passed, and his expression softened marginally. Do you have something for me? Against her instincts, Elena dug into her purse and slid him the small flash drive. A chill crept up her spine. What is going on? She thought. Why such secrecy? The man pocketed it discreetly and gave her a curt nod. Thank you for your service, he said. We'll be in touch. He turned on his heel and disappeared into the crowd of joggers and cyclists, leaving Elena bewildered and alone. Days passed. Elena heard nothing. No new instructions, no reassurance. The tension was unbearable. In her more paranoid moments, she considered that the agency might be burning her, or that Sinclair might be onto her. She tried to keep up the facade of normalcy at the foundation, attending meetings, drafting proposals, but Sinclair's attitude toward her had shifted ever so subtly. His gaze lingered on her in staff meetings. He asked more probing questions about her personal life. Elena felt a noose tightening around her neck. Then the hammer fell. It was a late afternoon when she arrived at the foundation only to find FBI agents swarming the corridors, combing through file cabinets, and speaking in hushed tones. Elena's immediate reaction was panic. Did the CIA coordinate with the FBI to raid Sinclair now? Before she could slip away, a grim-faced agent approached her. Elena Moreau, he asked, flashing a badge. She glanced at her co-workers for support, but everyone was too startled to intervene. Yes, she said. We have a warrant to search these premises, the agent continued. We may have some questions for you. He did not elaborate, but Elena understood. The net was closing around Sinclair and possibly her. Throughout the day, she answered the FBI's questions as best she could without compromising her CIA status. She feigned ignorance of any wrongdoing, but the FBI's penetrating stares told her they suspected more. Does the Bureau even know I'm with the CIA? A single phone call could clarify her position, but the CIA had gone radio silent. Elena felt utterly alone, a small piece of driftwood tossed about by powerful currents. When Victor Sinclair arrived later, surrounded by his legal team, he glared across the conference room at Elena with an intensity that froze her blood. She saw anger, betrayal, and cunning in that single stare. She realized with sinking dread that he suspected her involvement. Within a week, Elena received a subpoena from the U.S. Attorney's Office to testify before a federal grand jury. The letter spelled out that her testimony was crucial in the ongoing investigation into Victor Sinclair's alleged criminal enterprise. Elena stared at the official envelope, her mind spinning. Why me? Where is the CIA in all of this? Why aren't they stepping forward to protect or debrief me? She tried contacting the new handler, leaving voicemails on the encrypted line he had given her. Silence. Anxiety ate at her day and night. As the scheduled grand jury date approached, Elena wrestled with conflicting loyalties. The CIA taught her to keep her true allegiances hidden at all costs, but the law demanded her honesty under oath. And the only reason she had infiltrated Sinclair's circle was to gather evidence for the government. Did the CIA intend for me to bury the truth now? When Elena appeared before the grand jury, she told them what she knew of Sinclair's shady dealings, but held back the biggest revelation, that she was working at the CIA's behest. She felt certain that somewhere, there were sealed affidavits or secure channels that would confirm she was an undercover asset, sparing her from perjury charges. But for now, the official stance from the agency seemed to be, "We do not acknowledge your existence." Her testimony helped the prosecutors build their case, and soon Victor Sinclair was indicted on charges of money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and even espionage. The espionage charge was the real bombshell. Rumors swirled in the press that Sinclair had sold sensitive technology secrets to hostile entities. The story became front-page news. Tech tycoon indicted for espionage, corruption. And in those articles, Elena's name began popping up as a key witness, but with no mention of her CIA affiliation, of course. The final step was the trial. And so, Elena Moreau found herself subpoenaed yet again, this time for the biggest court case of the decade. She had no illusions. Sinclair's legal team would tear into her credibility, searching for any skeleton in her closet. Even without them knowing she was CIA, they would dissect every moment of her life in Sinclair's foundation. She braced herself for the fight. What Elena did not anticipate was that her own secrets would come crashing into the public eye, secrets she herself had forgotten. Back in that hushed courtroom, Elena sat in the witness box, trying to appear calm. The prosecutor, Brenda Collins, began the questioning with a gentle tone. "Miss Moreau, how did you come to work for Mr. Sinclair's philanthropic foundation?" "I was invited to one of his networking events," Elena said, her voice resonating through the quiet space. "After we spoke, he offered me a position as a junior advisor. And during your time at the foundation," Collins continued, "did you become aware of any irregular financial activities?" Elena nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, there were multiple offshore accounts, shell companies registered abroad. The funds that passed through them did not align with the foundation's stated philanthropic mission." A wave of muffled whispers rippled through the courtroom gallery. Sinclair's expression was stoic. The entire scene might have appeared straightforward had Elena not been grappling with an intense feeling of wrongness. A voice in her mind kept shouting, "There's something more you're supposed to say." In the gallery, an older black woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Elena recognized her as Miss Baker, a community leader from Atlanta who had once championed Sinclair's philanthropic outreaches. The heartbreak on Miss Baker's face was visible, a woman who had once believed Sinclair's promises of neighborhood revitalization. Elena felt her chest tighten with guilt on her behalf. The prosecutor nodded. "Can you specify how you discovered these anomalies?" Elena explained how the foundation's financial statements never quite matched the actual charitable contributions. She detailed suspicious wire transfers, referencing them by date and amount. Each instance rattled the room with quiet gasps. Sinclair's attorney, David Kessler, looked ready to pounce, but Collins had yet to hand the reins over. "Thank you, Miss Moreau," Collins said. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor." Judge Delgado turned her attention to the defense. "Mr. Kessler, your witness." Kessler rose smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks with a practiced air of confidence. He approached Elena. "Miss Moreau," he began, his voice carrying a subtle undertone of condescension, "you've painted a very incriminating portrait of my client. But let's talk about your credentials. You're not a certified accountant, correct?" Elena felt her anger flare, but she kept her voice steady. "That's correct, I'm not. But I worked closely with the foundation's accountants and had access to internal files." The discrepancies were evident. Kessler allowed a small, patronizing smile. "So, a non-accountant is testifying about financial discrepancies." He turned to the jury as though to present Elena's statement as questionable. Then he pivoted. "Miss Moreau, you testified to the grand jury as well, didn't you?" "Yes. In your grand jury testimony, you never once mentioned these alleged offshore accounts." Elena's brow furrowed. "I mentioned suspicious transactions. The grand jury session was sealed, but I You never referred explicitly to offshore accounts, Kessler interrupted. In fact, your sworn statement was riddled with ambiguous language, wasn't it? She opened her mouth to retort, but the logic was cunning. She had indeed used carefully chosen words, partly because she was still trying to hide her CIA affiliation. That was based on the questions I was asked, she said finally, not a lack of knowledge. Kessler smiled coolly. I see. So you carefully tailored your language then? Perhaps you've been trained to do so? Elena's pulse quickened. I know I was being truthful to the best of my ability. The attorney turned his back on her, striding a few steps away. Then, like a predator pouncing, he swung back. Miss Moreau, are you, or have you ever been, affiliated with any intelligence agency of the United States government? The question rang in the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Reporters snapped to attention, cameras clicking. Elena's body went cold. This was the question she had dreaded. She was under oath. Legally, she had to answer truthfully. But what about her classification? Her training hammered in her head. Deny, deny. Her sense of moral duty pressed on her chest. You swore to tell the truth. She swallowed. The word stuck in her throat. She glanced at the prosecutor, who looked stricken. They had not anticipated Kessler's direct assault. Elena's eyes slid to the judge. She remembered the oath she had taken moments ago and the deeper oath she'd given the CIA. Kessler seized on her hesitation. You're not answering, Miss Moreau. One might deduce that you are indeed CIA or FBI or some other clandestine operative planted to entrap my client. A murmur swept through the gallery, scandalized. Sinclair watched with an unreadable expression. Judge Delgado rapped her gavel once. Order in the court. Elena's mind spun. What do I say? Then, abruptly, a searing pain shot through her temples. She saw flashes, images like a slideshow from her CIA training. People's faces, instructors at Camp Perry, the coded phone calls, the private missions, the sudden reassignments. A memory from months ago, a short procedure in a CIA safe house, administered by a shady medical team. She'd woken up groggy, told it was a vaccination booster, but she had never fully believed that. What did they do to me? She gasped, pressing a hand to her forehead. The judge noticed her distress. Miss Moreau, are you all right? Elena's vision blurred. She wanted to speak, but her vocal cords felt locked. Panic seized her. Vague recollections of being told, if you're compromised, we protect you. We have contingency plans. But the CIA had abandoned her, left her to face the storm. Kessler's voice echoed. I'll ask again, Miss Moreau. Are you affiliated with the Central Intelligence Agency? Elena parted her lips, tears welling in her eyes. She felt an overwhelming urge to shout the truth, yet something deeper in her mind, some embedded conditioning, seemed to clamp down on her ability to form the words. Is this some form of a mental block? Did they do this to me? The notion was horrifying. The CIA had never told her anything about memory alteration, but she wasn't so naive as to think such techniques didn't exist. Kessler pressed on, sensing blood. The witness is unresponsive, he said sharply. I move to strike her testimony if she refuses to clarify her affiliations. Elena opened her mouth. I'm not sure, she stammered, tears beginning to flow. Kessler's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. You're not sure if you're CIA? Another wave of gasps erupted in the courtroom. Judge Delgado frowned. Counsel, approach the bench, she ordered, her voice steeled. The attorneys hurried forward, and a quiet but intense exchange ensued. From the witness stand, Elena couldn't hear everything, but she caught Kessler demanding the court's recognition that the witness was compromised and that her entire testimony might be tainted. Elena trembled, uncertain how to proceed. She felt the odd eyes of the entire room upon her, felt her carefully constructed life unraveling with each second. What have they done to me? She thought, her mind a swirl of confusion and betrayal. Did the CIA use me as a pawn and then wipe my memory of certain instructions? What happened next transpired in a series of chaotic moments that Elena would forever recall with surreal clarity. A burst of commotion at the rear of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. A stern-faced man in a dark suit, flanked by two individuals with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents, pushed past the crowd. The man stepped forward, ignoring the bailiff's protests. Your Honor, the man said, producing a badge. My name is Robert Walker with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm here with an urgent request to place a sealed statement on the record. Judge Delgado's frown deepened, but she nodded. Approach. Walker handed over a sealed envelope. As the judge examined its markings, Elena's breath caught. FBI? She saw Sinclair exchanging alarmed glances with Kessler. The tension soared. Judge Delgado read the statement silently, her expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. Finally, she spoke, her voice subdued but resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, this court has just received credible and classified information that Miss Moreau has been an asset working under covert status for the CIA in connection with an interagency task force. By order of the Department of Justice, certain details of her involvement were classified for reasons of national security. However, new information suggests that Miss Moreau's participation in this matter was compromised by an unauthorized medical procedure performed by a rogue element within the CIA. The details are under investigation. Another wave of astonished gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elena's heart hammered. She felt tears streaming down her cheeks, relief and terror mingling. Rogue element? The judge continued, looking at Elena with something akin to sympathy. Miss Moreau, it appears you have indeed been a covert operative, but your recollection of the scope of your mission may have been suppressed. She turned to Kessler. In light of this, the defense's motion to strike her testimony is denied. The witness's credibility will be considered alongside all available evidence. This court also acknowledges that Miss Moreau may have been a victim of unauthorized internal actions. Elena's mouth hung open. She stared at Walker, who gave her a small nod. He had come to her rescue, albeit too late to spare her the anguish. It dawned on her that there were warring factions within the government itself, some protecting Sinclair for their own ends, others determined to bring him down. In that invisible battle, Elena was a sacrificial pawn. Kessler sputtered his objections, but the judge overruled him. Sinclair's face was ashen, fury burning in his eyes. For the first time, Elena saw genuine fear behind his mask of arrogance. The rest of the trial was no less dramatic, but the biggest shock had already been unleashed. With Elena's testimony buttressed by mountains of paper evidence, and the sudden clarifications from the FBI that the CIA's infiltration had been legitimate, the prosecution gained an unstoppable momentum. Sinclair's empire of shell companies, money laundering, and shady deals unraveled in front of the jury's eyes. Although Sinclair's defense team fought tooth and nail, the evidence was too damning. The jury deliberated for 3 days, returning with guilty verdicts on multiple counts: money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit espionage. Sinclair's sentencing was scheduled for a later date, but the man who had once carried himself like an unassailable mogul now left the courtroom in handcuffs, head bowed, his future bound for a federal penitentiary. As he was led away, Elena caught one last glimpse of him. His eyes flashed with a venomous hate. She shivered, wondering if Sinclair's connections could still harm her from behind bars. But for now, justice had been served, or so it seemed. Outside the courthouse, a horde of reporters clamored to interview Elena, the mystery CIA witness. She felt an avalanche of conflicting emotions: anger at the CIA for using her so callously, sorrow for the communities that Sinclair had exploited, and a strange relief that the trial was over. The FBI's Robert Walker escorted her through the throng, shielding her from the worst of the media frenzy. "Elena," he said quietly once they were clear of the crowd, "I'm sorry for what you went through. This was never supposed to happen. We only learned about the rogue operation recently." She studied his face. "What does that even mean, a rogue element? Didn't the agency authorize my infiltration?" "Yes, they did. But there were individuals in the CIA who had separate agendas. There's internal evidence they sought to manipulate or even erase your memory to protect themselves. They never anticipated you'd end up testifying so publicly." He hesitated. "It looks like you were set up to deliver the evidence and then disappear into the shadows, one way or another." Elena's stomach churned. "So I was a disposable asset to them?" Walker didn't reply. His silence spoke volumes. In the weeks after the trial, Elena's life was in disarray. She was placed in a protective custody program until Sinclair's sentencing, as concerns lingered about his retribution. She spent her days in a small apartment on the outskirts of Virginia, under the watch of plainclothes FBI agents. Occasionally, she met with psychiatrists to try to piece together the full extent of the CIA's meddling in her mind. Late one evening, after another grueling therapy session, Elena found herself on a small balcony, staring at the stars. She sipped from a mug of tea, reflecting on the chain of events. She had joined the CIA to serve a higher purpose, to champion justice. Instead, she'd been manipulated, nearly sacrificed, and saved only because some conscientious individual stepped in at the final hour. A knock at the door startled her. She set down her tea and peered through the peephole. It was Robert Walker, wearing a simple jacket instead of his usual suit. She opened the door cautiously. "Robert, is everything okay?" He offered a brief, comforting smile. "There's news about Sinclair. May I come in?" She stepped aside. They settled in the small living room, the dull glow of a single lamp illuminating their conversation. "He's scheduled for sentencing next week," Walker said. "The prosecutors are pushing for a multi-decade sentence, but Sinclair's legal team is lobbying for leniency, citing some medical concerns." Elena scoffed. He had no leniency for any of his victims, nor for entire communities he tricked. Walker nodded. "I suspect the judge will sentence him harshly, but that's not the only reason I came." He cleared his throat. "I received word that the CIA's internal investigation is yielding evidence of unauthorized mind-altering experiments. You're not the only one, Elena. A handful of other assets have come forward with partial memory loss or strange triggers." She gripped her knees, breath catching. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough," he replied grimly. "There are rumors these experiments are reminiscent of MK Ultra." Elena had heard the name, an infamous Cold War program, but we don't have all the details yet. A surge of indignation coursed through Elena. "So even after all these decades, they still toy with people's minds?" Walker nodded. "Some in the agency do, but it's not the entire CIA. There are good people there who are appalled by this." She shook her head. "Unbelievable. Where does this leave me?" He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "With the truth and the chance to heal. You helped put away a dangerous man, and now you can help expose rogue factions within the government. Karma has a way of catching up with those who act in the shadows." Elena stared at the carpet, tears brimming. "I never wanted it to be like this." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Victor Sinclair's sentencing day arrived. The Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse buzzed with tension. Elena, accompanied by Walker and an FBI escort, took a seat in the gallery. She watched as Sinclair was led into the courtroom in cuffs, wearing a rumpled suit, his former air of invincibility thoroughly shattered. The proceedings began with the prosecution outlining the devastation Sinclair had wrought, the billions laundered, the communities defrauded, the foreign interests emboldened. Then Sinclair's attorneys made their plea for leniency. Sinclair, they argued, was remorseful, his health was failing, and he had contributed to charity. Elena balled her fists at that last argument. He used charities to launder money, not to help people. Finally, Judge Delgado spoke. She recounted the seriousness of Sinclair's crimes, how his actions betrayed the public trust and jeopardized national security. Her voice carried a solemn weight. "It is the judgment of this court," she pronounced, "that Victor Sinclair be committed to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 35 years. A wave of relief swept the courtroom, followed by hushed applause that the bailiffs quickly suppressed. Sinclair's shoulders slumped, but as he stood to be led away, he turned, locking eyes with Elena. His lips curled into a snarl. She shivered, recalling that once upon a time, she'd found him charming. Now she saw only a broken man, seething with hate. Elena left the courthouse feeling a mixture of triumph and sorrow. Sinclair had reaped what he had sown. Hard karma indeed. The communities he exploited would hopefully receive restitution, but Elena knew her own war wasn't over. Exposing the rogue CIA faction could take years, if it was even possible. She had more battles ahead. Yet, in that moment, stepping onto the courthouse steps, sunshine warming her face, Elena felt a semblance of peace. She had testified to the truth despite unimaginable pressure. Sinclair's downfall was a victory for justice, and though she couldn't reclaim the years of her life spent living a lie, she could move forward with honesty, forging an identity free from manipulation. Reporters clamored for a statement, their microphones thrust forward. Elena paused. This time, she didn't hide. She cleared her throat, voice wavering but resolute. "I'm glad justice was served," she said simply. "I hope we can now begin to heal the damage done." A throng of flashes and shouts followed her as she walked down the courthouse steps. Walker escorted her to a waiting car. As they drove away, Elena glanced at the reflection of the courthouse's towering columns in the window. She thought of the vow she'd once made to the CIA, to protect her country. Perhaps she had, in a convoluted, painful way. But she had paid a high price. Weeks later, Elena was relocated to a modest townhouse in a quiet Virginia neighborhood, a more permanent arrangement under federal protection. She had no interest in returning to CIA work, and the agency, mired in scandalous internal investigations, had little interest in her at the moment. That was just fine with her. In her new life, Elena applied her skills honestly, taking a consultant role with a legitimate nonprofit that focused on economic empowerment for minority communities. She used her inside knowledge of how unscrupulous players manipulate charities to bolster the nonprofit's safeguards against fraud. She found a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps this was the path she was always meant to walk, one rooted in real service rather than secret agendas. On a crisp autumn day, as leaves rustled across the sidewalk, Elena received a letter bearing the Department of Justice seal. Her heart lurched. Inside was a formal invitation to testify before a special congressional committee investigating unauthorized intelligence operations. The letter explained that her experience could help overhaul policies and protect future assets. Elena sat on her living room couch, reading and rereading the letter. A swirl of apprehension and resolve welled inside her. Yes, she thought, maybe it's time to shine a light on the shadows that nearly consumed me. She picked up her phone and dialed Walker. When he answered, she said, "Count me in." As she hung up, Elena closed her eyes and sighed. She could still hear the echo of the courtroom gasps from that day she testified, that pivotal moment when her identity, both known and hidden, came crashing down for all to see. But she'd survived it, and more. She'd emerged stronger, forging a new destiny that didn't require subterfuge or hidden loyalties. Courtroom gasps be damned, she thought. I'm done being a pawn. No longer an unwitting agent of shadows, Elena Moreau, black woman, former CIA operative, and now a passionate advocate for true justice, would continue her mission on her own terms. And for the first time in a long while, she felt truly free. Justice was served, but at what cost? Elena Moreau walked out of that courtroom forever changed. She had exposed the truth, brought down a powerful man, and survived a battle that nearly consumed her. But the scars remained, not just on her, but on a system that was never meant to protect people like her. The question now isn't what happens to Victor Sinclair. It's what happens next to Elena. Because when you take on the powerful, the fight doesn't end in the courtroom. It follows you in the shadows. If you want more stories of truth, power, and the unexpected twists of justice, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what's coming next.